places of the region and of the world. To begin with our event, we are going to hear the welcoming remarks from Martin Yagi, who is the head of cooperation of the Swiss Agency for Development of Cooperation, SDC. Martin, you're acknowledged. Thank you very much. I am not going to turn on my camera, but that's okay. I can still address my opening remarks in this way. Thank you very much for inviting me to briefly open this regional seminar on opportunities for green H2 strategies and policies. So for SDC and for the Swiss government, this is quite an innovative subject, especially because it is part of our CALAC Plus program, the Climate and Cleaner Project in Latin American Cities Plus, which is implemented by our Swiss contact, our partner, which works in the capital cities of Chile, Mexico, Colombia, Bogota, and here in Lima, Peru. As you know, this is a program that is going through its last phase of the first phase of the program. This year, this first phase is going to be completed. We have begun working on the second phase. So this issue of green hydrogen that we are addressing today might become a topic to be discussed in the future. The program as such is a program that was focusing mainly on the topics of seeing how to reduce greenhouse gases through two main subtopics. Number one, how to better manage everything that has to do with public transport, buses, in this four capital cities of the Pacific Alliance. As a program, how can we speed up the change towards buses that are still emitting too many black carbon and greenhouse gases, so this can be replaced by a better technology emitting less soot, such as the retrofitting of filtering systems in the buses. And we are also open to other technologies, such as the new technology that is being implemented, the technology that has to do with electrical systems. This would be another important contribution. And lastly, we need to be very open to systems such as hydrogen, which can also be produced in a green manner through solar energy, for instance, and not through other type of energy such as fossil energy. This could be an extremely interesting source, both for traffic, but also for other applications such as aviation in the future. So this has been the first subtopic. We have addressed the issue of public transport and how to accelerate changes in the bus fleets by means of new and cleaner technologies. And the other topic has to do with heavy construction machinery, these caterpillars, these yellow caterpillars that sometimes are quite underestimated as emitters of soot. And there we are also working on these countries to see how to reduce soot and greenhouse gases from this heavy construction machinery. Evidently, green hydrogen could be a solution, a very interesting solution, I might say. This is what I wanted to share with you. As a country, Switzerland, we have also taken the lead in the production of green hydrogen. And this is something that is heard increasingly more in Germany, all over Europe, the aviation industry as well. So I believe that it is worth learning more about this topic, to learn more about the opportunities, the challenges we face, and what does this entail for the sector of buses, of public transport, or how can it be used for heavy construction machinery? I wanted to close my short presentation with a question for the panelists, and this is, which is the environmental impact of generating green hydrogen and using it as fuel? I believe that this is a critical question that we need to bear in mind whenever we talk about new technologies, because we are seeking to reduce a problem, which is soot and the greenhouse gases as well. But at the same time, we should also reduce some potential impacts, potential environmental impacts, undesirable environmental impacts. So it would be interesting to hear the analysis of the panelists about this environmental impact of green hydrogen to be used as fuel. Having said this, I would like to finish with my opening remarks. Thank you very much to the organizers, our colleagues from Swiss Contact, from the CALAC Plus program, and also from the Association of Energy Engineers of Chile, who are also part of this regional seminar. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Martin, for your opening remarks. As you have said, we are learning about these new technologies. These new technologies bring about plenty of benefits to the planet at large, but I am sure that there are many other things to be taken into account. This event is organized by the Climate and Cleaner Project in Latin American Cities Plus, implemented by Swiss Contact and funded by SDC in partnerships and in coordination with the Association of Energy Engineers of Chile, to which we would also like to welcome. We also have people from Argentina. Thank you very much. From Abu Dhabi, Medellin. Thank you for today's morning. We are planning to have very interesting presentations. We are going to begin with the general background of green hydrogen, and then we will hear a presentation of what has been done, which are the plans around green hydrogen in Europe, particularly in Switzerland, and we'll also look at a proposal of what is being presented as a strategy for green hydrogen in the Latin American region through the Chilean experience. And we will wrap it up with two very interesting experiences, one from the German perspective and another proposal that, to support the region, and also an official voice around hydrogen, which is Inicio, which is a consultant specialized in hydrogen, which has presence in the Latin American region. So without further ado, I would like to stop now to explain to you that this event is being broadcasted in English. There's simultaneous interpretation available, and you will find this globe or world icon on the bottom part of your toolbar. And this is the option for interpretation. So you can click on that world icon and choose your desired language. For the English speakers, you can choose English, so you can follow the event in your language of choice. So, having said this, I would like to tell you that we're going to have 20 minutes for presentation from our speakers, and then we will have 10 minutes for the Q&A. I would ask you to please put your questions on the Q&A option of the Zoom platform. This is available on your screen. So as the panelist makes his or her presentation, please put your questions on the Q&A option so they can be answered later. The first presentation for today is going to be done by Robin Herbert, who is Robin Herbert is a civil industrial engineer from the École Centrale from Paris, ERF in Chile in 2014, in the framework of a French-Chilean cooperation program on climate change. He then worked on various energy and environmental innovation programs with the Chilean government and major stakeholders in the energy, water, and cellulose industries. He is currently representative in Chile of CEA-LITEN, which is the French Institute for Energy energy transition, which seeks to support the Chilean national strategy on solar energy, hydrogen, and green mining, working on R&D and training programs with both public and private stakeholders. Welcome, Robin. The floor is yours. As I said, you have 20 minutes for your presentation and 10 minutes for the questions and answers. Robin, you are acknowledged. Thank you very much, Freddy. Thank you very much to the Swiss Cooperation and all the organizers of this event. I cannot show my video, but I can share my screen. Can you hear me okay? Yes, we can hear you okay. Thank you very much, Robin. You're acknowledged, and we can also see your presentation, so everything looks great. Very well then. Today, I will present to you the CALAC, which is the French Institute for Energy Transition. I will show you how from this technological institute we can support the industry towards decarbonization in a logic of economic competitiveness. In this picture, you can see one of our technological platforms in the French Alps, very close to our friends from Switzerland. But before I begin with this presentation related to energy application and green hydrogen, they asked me to make a conceptual introduction of green hydrogen. So I am going to start with that. Why green hydrogen? The first message I want to share with you is that our energy matrix worldwide, all our infrastructure and our logistic is based on molecules, not on electrons. Electricity is the electrical matrix, is a small part of the final consumption of energy worldwide, which is done through molecules, through fossil fuels, such as oil, gas, carbon, etc. So that is the first message I want to share with you today. Our energy matrix needs molecules as electrical carriers, and these molecules are complex series of atoms, carbon and hydrogen. And I like to explain it this way. If we want to decarbonize the energy matrix, then we have to remove these atoms. And we have to work with the hydrogen atoms. And this explains why green hydrogen, and this would be an answer to the anti-green hydrogen. This is an answer. Why? Because we cannot do everything with electricity today. So we need green fuels. This is one first message. The second message is which are our great partners for energy transition. Here on the right side of the chart, you can see that we have two main partners. One of them is the photovoltaic plants and the wind farms. Why are they our partners? Because over the last 10 years, their price has been in free fall. Here, it's impressive in terms of photovoltaic panels and also the wind energy. And today they are energy sources, wind and solar photovoltaic, which are much more competitive than the traditional sources such as fossil fuels. So these are our main partners because they allow us to generate electricity that has been decarbonized, which has an environmental impact. Sometimes they talk about zero emissions. I really don't like that term because there's always some emissions. We require materials to produce that energy. We require energy to produce the photovoltaic modules, and that energy has not been decarbonized. So this partly answers the question of Martin, and I'll be happy to elaborate on that question later on. So in this way, we can generate decarbonized electricity with a lower carbon footprint. But the problem is that those wind and solar energies are intermittent. So we need to store the energy. And there we have another third-rate ally, which are the lithium batteries. Over the last decades, their price has gone down, but today they are much more competitive for many applications. And these are our partners, as I said, our allies. Now, in this chart here, we only have electrons. As I said, we need molecules. And there we have the fourth one, which is the green hydrogen. I just want to mention that I am focusing on wind and solar because nowadays these are the most competitive decarbonized energies worldwide. But we should also mention that the Latin American continent has many other resources. Latin America is a rich continent in terms of solar and wind, but also in terms of biomass, water resources, marine energy, geothermal energy. So we also need to mention that. I do not want to forget about them. I am going to focus more on solar and wind, but we should also consider these other energy or power sources. As I said, we have this concept of power to X. And I'm very happy and I'm very thankful to our friends from H2 Chile who are going to make a presentation tomorrow. I like this diagram very much. This explains it very well. Here, from the concept of power to X, I have an electrical power that comes from renewable energies. And with this electricity, with those electrons, I can generate X things, many things, X number of things. So the concept of green hydrogen is that I have electricity, I have water, and I'll be able to produce that water electrolysis by applying electrical current to the water, and I obtain two things, hydrogen and oxygen. And then I can start working on the molecule to generate many other things. So first of all, the H2, the hydrogen itself, can be used directly in fuel cells. It transforms hydrogen to electricity, and also hydrogen can be burned as fuel to generate energy. And then I can do a lot of chemistry here. Power to gas, for instance. I can capture carbon. I can make it react with hydrogen to generate methane. I can generate ammonia. This is a molecule that is used mainly on the industry, especially for fertilizers in agriculture, for explosives in the mining industry. Today, this molecule is carbonized. It is generated based on fossil fuel. The idea is to replace carbonized hydrogen by a decarbonized molecule to produce this. And I can also add more carbon atoms with a more complex molecular series to produce synthetic methanol, synthetic oil, etc. So this figure explains the versatility of hydrogen and why is it necessary to achieve our energy transition. Deep down, because of its versatility, hydrogen can be introduced almost anywhere in our energy or power grid. So having explained these concepts around green hydrogen, I want to present to you the CALITEN, which is the French Institute for Energy Transition. CALITEN is focused on 4 areas. You can see them on your left, 4 research divisions: solar energy, lithium ion batteries, hydrogen and power to X, and a 4th division, which is on nanomaterials for energy, which feeds all the other divisions. We always have a comprehensive approach for any problem. All these divisions are communicate with each other. Our researcher and experts talk to each other to address the more global problems that you see here on the center: smart grid, electric mobility, circular economy, etc. Which is our mission? It is to support the industry towards energy transition. We were created to support the industry, the private sector. We are a public entity, a public center, but almost half of our budget comes from direct contracts with the industry. How do we do it? Our mission is to transfer knowledge and technology to the industry, and we do this sometimes by developing technologies that we built, or we co-develop technologies with the industry. We adapt existing technologies, commercial technologies for certain applications with our industrial partners. And for this, we have 2 sites, 2 large sites that you see here on the pictures, we have a lot of equipment and infrastructure, and they allowed us to do a pre-industrial test and prototyping for our 2 sites in the French Alps. We have 14 platforms, thematic platforms, to do technological piloting. I always like to show this chart. The CELITES is an institute within a larger research center called CEA. CEA is the Commission of Atomic Energy and Alternative Energies in France. CEA or CEA. This is a public center of 20,000 people. The CEA LITEM, which is focused on energy transition, we have around 1,000 people in CEA LITEM out of those 20,000 that work for CEA. Our mission is to fill this death valley that you see here on the screen where nobody wants to invest. Why? Because it is not profitable. So here we have the concept of technology readiness level. On the left, we are on the side of fundamental or basic investment, which is commonly done in universities and government bodies, which is the laboratory. And on the right, we have the private sector, which needs commercial technologies, industrialized technologies. So we are like in the middle. So we can take the technologies from the laboratory towards the private sector, and we work with universities, government, and the industry to do so in this so-called death valley where the private sector cannot invest because it is not a priority. So it is the role of public entities of taking on this role. I work in Chile. I am based in Santiago. And I want to underscore that the government of Chile has understood that problem very well. And over the last few years, it has developed, or it has begun the development of important initiatives like the one you see here on this list, which addresses all those problems: energy transition, solar energy, green hydrogen, with the rationale of a technological institute with a role which is very similar in terms of supporting the industry from applied research centers. Well, let me show you our solar energy platform, because in order to produce green hydrogen, the most important thing to produce green hydrogen so it can be competitive, low cost compared to fossil fuels, first and foremost, we need to generate renewable electrical power or energy. So there we have several allies, which are the photovoltaic panels, and CALAC has a technological platform that you see here on the picture of 400 people dedicated only to the photovoltaic industry, with a very integrated and comprehensive vision, considering the materials, the nanomaterials, down to the cells, the modules, the integration of those modules into real industrial conditions. So this is the rationale. This is our rationale. And our final objective is to lower the cost of photovoltaic electrical energy so we can reduce the cost of green hydrogen production. Well, let me show you other examples from our lithium hydrogen battery production. We work from the material synthesis down to the system integration into a more commercial environment or pre-industrial environment. And in the middle of all this, we can do modeling of technologies, we can characterize technologies, and we can do a lot of technological overseeing. We have platforms to test out our technologies and also other commercial technologies to generate techno-financial databases that will allow us to have a future vision of the technologies that are coming in the future and the technologies we need to bet on in the future. So at the level of hydrogen, our role has been to generate demonstrators, pilot projects with the industry. Here I'm just showing you a few examples. I would also like to mention the project Highway, because this is a project that has involved private off-takers, delivery companies, this project, and this was the first fleet and the largest fleet of hydrogen vehicles that still work, developing the value chain of green hydrogen from production to the final use. In this case, it is electric mobility. I want to mention this because this allows us to articulate and coordinate the different stakeholders across the value chain from production to the final use, also involving clients that still do delivery with these vehicles. I believe that this is important, and this is something that the Chilean government is interested on. To boost the green hydrogen industry, we need to involve all the sectors in an earlier stage, even the clients, the buyers who are going to buy hydrogen. This is an example of technology transfer, successful technology transfers. As I said, for the green hydrogen economy, this has to do first with electrical generation. We focus mainly on photovoltaic modules. Then we need electrolyzers to produce hydrogen. And then we have the fuel cells at the level of end use or final use of hydrogen. And these are projects that take time because it's like 15 years from the strategic decision where we say, based on our technological surveillance and our databases and all the information we manage, then we are going to focus on this technology. In the case of photovoltaic modules, we focus on a specific technology, which is highly bifacial. This was a time where nobody was betting on bifacial. Now, all the plants that are built, the photovoltaic plants that are built, most of them are like this, but this is quite recent. So it was a good bet on our side, and it allowed us to develop, from this strategic decision, it allowed us to develop the technology, the proof of concept, pilot demonstrators, until we were able to produce this technology NL, which has been produced in Italy. and we are testing it out in the Atacama Desert to evaluate the performance of photovoltaic modules in desert conditions, always with the end goal of reducing the cost of photovoltaic energy under desert conditions in this case. The same for electrolyzers, etc., and fuel cells. I would also like to mention, I know that I am running out of time, but I would like to mention that there are different ways of building technology. We can transfer it directly to a large industry. It is not Enel. We can generate a joint venture with a large industry such as Schlumberger. We are doing this with SEA Invest. We have a separate entity that can invest and can become a shareholder of the company to boost these electrolyzers. But the third case is to create a Symbio standard, a startup, sorry, Symbio. It was recently bought by Michelin and Faurecia. At first it was a startup, but it has been bought by Michelin now, so it is no longer a startup. Successful cases here. I am showing you that we can develop technologies from scratch, but we can also adapt technologies. Here you can see 3 cases, industrial cases, indicating that they needed to electrify my tractor, my forklift, or this catamaran. This was the first vehicle that traveled the world using only solar energy. So we designed the entire system for this boat, this small boat. So in this case, it is more than one adaptation. It could be also hybridization, battery and FC, not only hydrogen. And we have all the infrastructure to test it out and to characterize the climatic tests, vibration tests, terrain inclination tests. And our goal in Chile, as mentioned Martin, there's a very important thematic in terms of mining trucks and the electrification of these mining trucks. Our goal is to support the industry in the development of technologies adapted to height, altitude. As you know, many mining operations work in a specific terrains and at very high altitudes, and this requires technological adaptation. Just to mention that we have several experts in terms of security standardization worldwide. We can share that experience in Chile and Latin America. Our intention is to contribute with that experience in everything that has to do with regulation and standardization of green hydrogen in the economy. This is just an example of the battery session. Just to show you that we also have a role of industry coordinator across the value chain in the economic sector in the case of lithium batteries. Unfortunately, I have a slide for hydrogen as well, but I can not yet show you that slide because there's some confidential work with certain researchers.
Well, just to finish, how do we support the industry with technology transfer of the intellectual property, knowledge, characterization of technologies, testing, improvement, adaptation of technologies, and we can also have training. And in Chile, we have that. We have been doing it, and we intend to continue very strongly training in Chile and in Latin America. For example, the picture that you can see here is a pilot plant of photovoltaic modules that is in the French Alps, and it served to train the people of Enel so that they could have their own factory of modules in Italy. Of course, we can also do technological benchmarking, technical and economic analysis, etc. And I just wanted to mention the Atomos Tech project that brought us to Chile. The Atomos Tech project is one of the programs that was mentioned by the Chilean government, which seeks, I think that Atomos Tech is the Institute of Bifacial for the Desert. So the objective of Atomos Tech is to minimize the cost of electric energy and the cost of green hydrogen in desert conditions. So we have some test plants at the industrial level and also at a smaller level to test different technologies in desert conditions. And well, with that, I'm done. Please visit our facilities here in the French Alps. I was born here in this valley, so I know it very well. So if you're there, please visit us. I will be your tour guide. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Robin, for the very interesting presentation with the fundamental concepts and also because of all of the knowledge that the CEA has developed. Thank you so much for your presentation. I would also like to thank all of our colleagues that have questions for us from Mexico and from every region in the world. So in this part of the Q&A, we are going to have the support of Paulina Ramirez. She's a civil engineer and electrician of the University of Chile, project contract manager in the CV Group of Chile and researcher in the Energy Center of the University of Chile and in the Sustainable Center of Electromobility, CASE. And she's currently the president of the Association of Energy Engineers of Chile, and she's also a member of the Council of Leading Women in Energy and Environment in Chile. So we're running out of time, so we're going to have shorter presentations next. Paulina, go ahead. Thank you very much, Freddie, and thank you very much, Robin, for the presentation. Can you hear me well? Okay, perfect then. Well, I would also like to thank you for the invitation. I have a tour guide in the Alps now, so I'm happy about that. Thank you very much. And I wanted to start with a question that was asked at the beginning, and even if you answered it and said that you could elaborate more on that in the end, is what is the impact of green oxygen as fuel? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question. What is the impact, the environmental impact of using green hydrogen as a fuel? Right. That is a very wide question, and I think that I will summarize it in terms of the ore, the mineral, the metals that are required for energy transition, because it is an important topic for the continent, for the Latin American continent. The Latin American continent doesn't only have resources for renewable energy that are huge, but it also has the resources of strategic minerals for energy transition. We could mention the most famous ones like lithium, right? Lithium batteries, and then also other rare earths and copper in the case of Peru and in the case of Chile. To give an idea, an electric car needs 3 times more copper than a regular car. A thermal car, sorry. So our idea in energy transition is to reduce emissions. And I think that to give an example of green ammonia, with solar energy, you can reduce in 90% the emissions of ammonia production. That gives you an idea of the potential of reduction. And it is important to say that it's never zero emissions. I don't like that word because it's always going to be a drastic reduction of emissions, but there are always emissions because you have to think that all of the photovoltaic models that are installed here today come from China, right? And they're manufactured there and they require materials, they require energy to be manufactured, and therefore it's important to say that they are not zero emissions. Of course the emissions are a lot less, but well, I don't know, that on the one hand. And at the level of the strategic minerals, we're going to have to extract many minerals to achieve this energy transition, and that they have to be extracted in a clean manner, and that is the challenge. The industry, for example, the automobile industry and mobility in Europe is very aware of this need of saying we cannot decontaminate Medellin or Zurich if we are contaminating the salt flats in Bolivia or Chile. So this extraction of lithium, copper, and other metals has to be done in a clean way. And here I would like to emphasize the efforts of the government and the industry of Chile to create a virtuous cycle where the extractive industry that has to be decarbonized, and this deep inside promotes and fosters the economy of green hydrogen locally to strengthen infrastructure at the local level, because there is a demand of the extractive industries to be decarbonized, to have a lower environmental impact. Water is extremely important, right? Thank you so much, Robin. Well, I have a lot of questions here in the Q&A session, and we have very short time because we took more time than we should have. So can you please make your answers shorter? Franco Piero Enriquez asks, why is this hydrogen technology not made massive? Is that because the price is not competitive? Or in how many years do you foresee a global energy market based on hydrogen? Well, the forecasts are based on economic competitiveness, and they are closer to 2030, 2035. That is a very gross estimation, but it's something like that. And then the massive use of green hydrogen that will get to a market of a size that is similar to the current oil market. Well, we're talking about 2050 for that. And here there is another question by Stefan Gulgari. I hope I mentioned your name. I pronounced your name well. So CALAC Plus will have the website available, the presentations available on the website for all of the speakers, so we can download them from there. And there William Ramirez, what is the obstacle to implement green energies in countries that are of a high potential, and how do you involve the green technologies, or how can you overcome the main obstacles? Well, that is a very wide question, and I'm going to try to summarize it, but I think that the main challenge is that currently, unfortunately, the technologies are not developed here. What I mean is almost everything is imported, in spite of the fact that there are small factories, but well, that's still very small. So the main challenge is to have the capacity to integrate those imported technologies and give them value added to produce with a competitive cost, renewable energy, and green hydrogen. So that is a first challenge in the short run, and I think that those capacities already exist. They require coordination, but they are there. The other challenge is to try to stop being dependent on foreign technologies, and that means developing technologies. For example, the projects in Chile that I mentioned, there is technology transfer towards Chile, towards the continent. And that is not necessarily developing the technologies from scratch, but adapting the existing technologies to specific conditions of the Latin American market. And the third point that we can mention is that there are companies, European companies or foreign companies, and I think that they're willing to export or import components to the Latin American continent when these components are going to be assembled in Latin America. And the assembly of solar panels and batteries and electrolyzers, that is the great part of the value added is precisely in the assembly area. So there is a possibility for the continent to capture value in a competitive manner without having to invest too much from scratch to develop these technologies. Let's say if I want to develop batteries, I need millions, but I don't need to start from scratch. Thank you so much, Robin. And I'm sorry our Q&A session is over. But Robin, if you can take a look at the chat box, you can answer the questions that are still pending. You can answer them directly to the people who asked the questions, and then we can publish them for everybody who's interested in the Q&A session. So thank you very much once again, and now I'll give the floor to Freddie so that we can hear from our next speaker. Thank you so much, Paulina. Thank you so much, Robin, for your presentation. And now we will continue with the program. And now we have the presence of Stefan Oberholzer from the Swiss Federal Office of Energy. Stefan has a diploma in experimental physics, mathematics, and astronomy from the University of Basel, and he has a PhD in philosophy from the same university. He has a postdoc at the University of Delft and another postdoc at the University of Basel at the Institute of Physics and Nanoscience in Switzerland. He worked at the ABB Research Center in Switzerland, and since 2008 he has been working at the Swiss Federal Office of Energy, where he is currently head of fuel cells and hydrogen. Welcome, Stefan. It is a pleasure to have you here in this event. The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Thank you for this possibility to participate in this seminar on green hydrogen. It's a great pleasure.
Sobre hidrógeno verde. Es un gran placer que me hayan invitado y hablar con ustedes, decirles un poco acerca de las actividades de energía y celdas de combustible, también en el contexto de la Estrategia Nacional de Energía para el 2050. Bueno, una introducción muy corta de dónde estoy trabajando. Estoy trabajando para la Oficina Federal Suiza de Energía, que es directamente parte de la Administración Gubernamental Suiza, y estoy trabajando allí y hay muchos temas que cubrimos y estoy trabajando para la promoción de la investigación y el desarrollo, especialmente en el área fotovoltaica, pero el día de hoy estoy hablando acerca de hidrógeno y de celdas de combustible o pilas de combustibles. Los contenidos de esta charla serán que primero voy a empezar con un vistazo general muy breve acerca de la política energética y climática en Suiza, y luego voy a hablar un poco más acerca de las celdas de combustible e hidrógeno en Suiza, la producción, demanda, los actores, y claro está también el tema de el taller de hoy y de mañana, el hidrógeno verde. ¿Qué está ocurriendo en Suiza? La movilidad del hidrógeno. Voy a hablar poco acerca de esto porque va a haber una presentación muy buena de Patrick Huber el día de mañana de H2 Energy, que es una empresa que es el motor principal desde el sector privado que desarrolla movilidad en Suiza, y también voy a hablar acerca de energía gas y voy a darles un resumen de nuestro programa de investigación y colaboración internacional. Pero déjenme empezar con unas cuantas palabras acerca de Suiza. En general podríamos decir que es un país pequeñísimo si lo comparamos con América Latina, y está ubicado en el centro de Europa. Tiene 8 millones de personas y tiene un consumo primario energético de más o menos 300 terawatt horas. 75% de esto depende de las importaciones. Solamente hay 25% de los requisitos finales que son cubiertos por los recursos locales. Gastamos cada año alrededor de 24 gigaeuros, o miles de millones de euros, que corresponden a 4% del PBI. Para estos combustibles. Y si es que ustedes tienen esta cifra en su mente y la comparan con el costo para la producción de hidrógeno verde o infraestructura, entonces la producción de hidrógeno verde e infraestructura no se ve tan grande ya. Entonces es también un tema relativo a costos hacer este cambio de combustibles fósiles. Claro, déjenme hablar acerca de la energía. Automáticamente estamos hablando acerca del clima, y el cambio climático también es visible en Suiza. Como ustedes pueden ver aquí, por ejemplo, este es el glaciar más grande de Europa, Aletsch, y pueden ver cómo se ha reducido en los últimos 150 años, y esto también ha tenido un impacto muy fuerte en la producción de electricidad o de energía en Suiza, ya que más de la mitad depende del agua. Es decir, tenemos energía de centrales hidroeléctricas, y este glaciar es un reservorio de almacenamiento natural. Las emisiones de gas de efecto invernadero están casi el 80% relacionadas con la energía, y es por eso que la energía y la política climática está muy articulada. Lo que pueden ver aquí es que el transporte tiene un impacto muy fuerte en las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, como probablemente en todos lados, alrededor de 1/3. Esa es la razón por la cual Suiza tiene una estrategia para reducir estas emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero. Lo que ven aquí es el plan. Cómo llegar al año 2050 con una nueva Suiza. Esto significa que no vamos a tener emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero que vayan a ocurrir. Tenemos este objetivo de un cero neto y por lo tanto se necesitan tecnologías, se necesitan hacer grandes esfuerzos en el sector de construcción y también en el sector de transporte, como ya mencioné con anterioridad. Y probablemente también necesitamos tecnologías de emisiones negativas que capturen CO2 desde la fuente y también finalmente del aire y almacenarlo en el terreno. Por primera vez en estas nuevas perspectivas que se han publicado a fines del año pasado, el hidrógeno verde también se ha propuesto con una cantidad sustancial de 60 kilotons que deberían producirse por electrólisis, utilizando la electricidad de las plantas de ríos y principalmente se va a utilizar para el transporte pesado. Y creo que este es el tema que va a abordar el señor Hugo mañana con ustedes. En el año 2011, hace 10 años después del desastre de Fukushima en Japón, el gobierno suizo decidió hacer una estrategia actualizada de energía para Suiza y tomó solo unos cuantos días para tomarse esta decisión para poder alejarse de lo nuclear. Y Suiza tiene 5 reactores y lo que ustedes ven aquí es el primero, que finalmente ya está fuera de la red eléctrica desde hace un año. Y claro está, es un desafío reemplazar la energía nuclear, como ustedes pueden ver en esta lámina aquí. Ya mencioné que la energía hidroeléctrica tiene un papel muy importante en Suiza. En la naranja tenemos nuclear, que va a desaparecer, especialmente en el invierno. Dependemos fuertemente en la interconexión con Europa para importar también energía verde. Y claro está, Suiza tiene que aumentar la producción de energía verde en los siguientes años y principalmente se va a basar en fotovoltaico. Como ustedes pueden ver aquí, los paneles fotovoltaicos serán la principal contribución, probablemente también viento. Y ahora, si hablamos del hidrógeno verde, si vemos los detalles de las perspectivas energéticas al 2050 y cómo es que esto se ve, los proveedores de energía basados en electricidad, que incluyen hidrógeno, se necesitan para llegar a este objetivo cero, especialmente en el sector de transporte. Entonces necesitamos socios y dependemos mucho de la producción nacional, pero también hay hidrógeno que se importará. Y aún no queda claro de dónde vendrá, cómo vendrá, si es que va a ser a través de la matriz de gas o líquido o amoníaco u otros vectores. Y no tenemos una estrategia nacional aún, sin embargo, se nos pide desarrollar esto a nivel de políticas. Entonces, en la siguiente sección, yo les voy a dar un vistazo general muy breve acerca del hidrógeno en general en Suiza. Alrededor del 95% del hidrógeno que utilizamos a la fecha hoy en Suiza es fósil o gris y se utiliza principalmente para, o se produce por refinerías y se consumen directamente allí. Y lo que vemos aquí que por primera vez también la electrólisis empieza a surgir alrededor del 4% y es verde en el sentido de que se utiliza electricidad o energía que tiene una huella de carbono muy baja porque la energía hidroeléctrica es de alguna forma la mejor. Y como se había dicho antes, se utiliza en refinerías, pero también en la industria química o farmacéutica o en la industria de procesamiento de metales. Y lo que también se ve aquí por primera vez es el transporte pesado que realmente está creciendo las aplicaciones de celdas o pilas de combustible. Las celdas de combustible se utilizan en Suiza solamente para el transporte ahora. Ha habido algunas pequeñas aplicaciones para calor combinado y energía, pero no como en otros países. También hay algunas aplicaciones fuera de la red eléctrica, como por ejemplo para respaldo de telecomunicaciones, pero lo principal, como ustedes pueden ver en azul y en celeste, es para el sector transportes. En este mapa, yo no quiero entrar a los detalles porque ustedes van a encontrar la información en esta página web. Incluso aquí pueden ver un vistazo general de los actores de la industria y del área de investigación. El mensaje que yo quiero transmitirles es que hay muchos actores y no son los grandes actores, los fabricantes de equipos originales como en otros países, sino que también son empresas especializadas, empresas pequeñas y medianas que son activas aquí, y también hay centros de investigación altamente calificados. Con respecto al hidrógeno verde en Suiza, esto tiene una historia muy larga. Ha habido una demanda creciente en el último siglo, alrededor de 1940, para utilizar el hidrógeno en Suiza como alimentación química, de hecho, para la producción de amoníaco, y al mismo tiempo había la disponibilidad de electricidad barata de la energía hidroeléctrica que se construyó en ese momento en los Alpes. Entonces, había la idea de desarrollar una electrólisis de presión alcalina eficiente para mejorar el hidrógeno per se, y esto, de hecho, acabó en la comercialización por parte del URGI con una tecnología de electrólisis eficiente. Esta tecnología de electrólisis, de hecho, sigue siendo utilizada, como ustedes pueden ver aquí. Lo que ustedes ven en la foto es el electrolizador más grande de Europa, uno de los más grandes del mundo, de 4.3 megawatts, y dos de ellos siguen estando en operación. 6.6 megawatts, perdón, y es una empresa que produce piedras sintéticas, zafiros, etcétera, y se necesita el hidrógeno como fuente para producir calor de alta temperatura. Esta tecnología, de hecho, ha sido comprada hace unos cuantos meses por una empresa alemana que se llama Sunfire, y lo que quiero mostrar aquí son las diferentes tecnologías de electrólisis para la producción de hidrógeno. Ven que es la membrana de polímetro, membranas de electrolito polimérico. El sistema puede variar rápidamente, por lo tanto pueden utilizar energía que fluctúa. La electrólisis alcalina es muy interesante para sistemas de un gran tamaño, y como pueden ver en esta diapositiva, aún podemos ver sistemas eficientes que no consumen tanta electricidad para la producción de hidrógeno. Aquí en esta imagen, en esta lámina, ven nuevas centrales o plantas de electrólisis con energía limpia para la movilidad, y es producida por la empresa Hydrospider, que le pertenece a H2 Energy, y vamos a escuchar más de ellos mañana. Dos plantas de electrólisis PEM, membranas de electrolito polimérico, han sido puestas en operación el año pasado y producen alrededor de 200 toneladas de hidrógeno verde para darle el abastecimiento a los camiones con celdas de combustible, y hay otros que están yendo en la misma dirección. Esta es otra empresa que planea tener 2.5 megawatts. Por lo tanto, en los siguientes años vamos a tener 20, 40 megawatts que vienen, y lo mismo es cierto para todo el continente europeo. Veo muchas iniciativas que están en curso. Con respecto a la investigación, también estamos apoyando proyectos que abordan el hidrógeno verde de otras fuentes que no son la energía eléctrica, principalmente solar, directamente. No quiero hablar acerca de los detalles, pero la idea es que se utilice energía solar concentrada para poder dividir el agua, finalmente también H2O directamente, y ahí se tiene el hidrógeno y monóxido de carbono y CO2, y con estos dos elementos se puede producir gas a líquido, como se mencionó en la charla anterior. como combustibles que se necesitan, por ejemplo, para la aviación. Y hay una empresa que se llama Synhelion en Suiza que trata de hacer una intensificación de esta tecnología y escalarla. Probablemente esta tecnología nunca se va a utilizar en Suiza porque no tenemos estos recursos solares. Sin embargo, claro está, hay otros lugares en este planeta, por ejemplo, en Chile, u otros lugares en donde podría ser muy interesante aplicar esto. Por lo tanto, esta es una empresa sumamente interesante porque realmente tratan de comenzar con lo que se aprendió de la investigación y el desarrollo para tratar de llevar esto a escala, como ustedes pueden ver en esta imagen. Finalmente, yo estaba mencionando también que tenemos que importar hidrógeno verde de otros lugares, en Suiza también. Probablemente esto sea cierto para todo el continente europeo. Lo que ven aquí es un gráfico que extraje del Consejo de Hidrógeno, que es una entidad con actores industriales que analiza cómo se llevará a escala el hidrógeno y el costo de hidrógeno que se ve aquí. Hay muchos lugares en el planeta donde es muy atractivo producir hidrógeno de fuentes renovables. La movilidad de hidrógeno en Suiza, como he dicho antes, este será el tema de la charla de mañana. No hay subsidios orientados a la tecnología, pero sí hay un marco regulatorio muy fuerte, por ejemplo, el endurecimiento de los límites de emisión de CO2. Y de la misma manera hay pequeñas ayudas de subsidios y Patrick Herbert va a explicar esto el día de mañana. Tenemos un apoyo público muy fuerte para acrecentar las competencias a través de la investigación y desarrollo y también a través de la innovación, y también tenemos apoyo para el pilotaje y la demostración que ayuda justamente a dar inicio a todo esto. Mencioné unos cuantos, por ejemplo, tenemos un proyecto muy exitoso de demostración en buses del 2011 al 2016 con buses operados con hidrógenos. Lamentablemente, ya no está en curso, se ha detenido, pero muestra una gran confiabilidad operativa y la experiencia de aquí también se está utilizando ahora en otros proyectos. Para los camiones, tenemos un par de proyectos del año 2016 al año 2020, algunas demostraciones para demostrar cómo es que funciona producir hidrógeno verde de energía de corriente de río, cómo almacenarlo, cómo producir las primeras estaciones de recarga de hidrógeno que estaban completamente integradas y realmente accesibles por el público, y una estación de investigación y desarrollo, y también un camión piloto que fue construido para demostrar toda la cadena. A la fecha es Hyundai que entrega los camiones a Suiza. El despliegue de la infraestructura está en curso, es decir, 6 estaciones de recarga de hidrógeno ya están operativas, y eso ha sido desarrollado en el marco de tiempo de 2 años, principalmente sin subsidios, y se basa en un modelo de negocios que se va a presentar el día de mañana. La idea principal es tener camiones que consuman, digamos, 30, 40 veces más que un carro de un único pasajero, y por lo tanto podríamos utilizar esta estación, y eso es necesario para poder utilizar este tipo de modelo de negocios. Y también ven en la diapositiva que hay otros que están siendo planeados o también que están siendo construidos. Los vehículos eléctricos de celdas de combustible. Vemos que casi no tenemos vehículos, bueno, tenemos 6 buses en operación del 2011 al 2016, pero ahora empieza con vehículos de 100 pasajeros que están en las carreteras y alrededor de 50 camiones también. Bien, aquí no voy a entrar a los detalles, pero ha habido muchos proyectos para preparar, para generar pericia y competencias, para aprender cómo lidiar con el hidrógeno, y algunos carros ya no están en las carreteras suizas. Energía a gas también se mencionó antes. En la charla previa también hay actividades en este campo. Por ejemplo, un proyecto grande 2.5 megawatts, electrólisis PEM, que utiliza el CO2 de una planta de agua residual para producir gas sintético, y este gas sintético luego va a alimentar la matriz eléctrica que se utiliza para calefacción y otras aplicaciones. Por lo tanto, no tiene nada que ver con movilidad. Sin embargo, el motor principal para el hidrógeno en Suiza es la movilidad. Finalmente, unas cuantas palabras de nuestros programas. Tenemos varios programas diferentes en la oficina suiza de energía para apoyar la investigación, el pilotaje y demostración en diferentes tecnologías. 1 o 2 programas también para hidrógeno y celdas de combustible.
Es el desarrollo de celdas de combustible para lo que es estaciones, y el énfasis aquí también se da en aplicaciones automotrices. En el caso de hidrógeno, siempre estamos apoyando muchos proyectos en renovables, no en fósil, porque esto ya ha sido bien establecido, pero proyectos en lo que es almacenamiento, como comprimir el hidrógeno y los códigos y las normas o estándares para lo que es recarga o reabastecimiento. Esto también tratamos de hacerlo en un contexto internacional. Tratamos de colaborar con otros a través de la agencia, del programa de la Agencia Internacional de Energía. Estoy mencionando aquí solamente los más importantes, y también a través de IPH, que es la Alianza Internacional para el Hidrógeno y Celdas de Combustible en la Economía, que es una organización muy importante para intercambiar información, IPH. A nivel europeo, los actores suizos están muy involucrados en el Joint Undertaking de hidrógeno y celdas de combustible. Esto se lleva a cabo desde el año 2008 y ha ayudado muchísimo para lo que es demostración y pilotaje. Finalmente, pero no menos importante, H2 Energy es un miembro de directorio de Hydrogen Europe. Algunos actores suizos también están directamente involucrados en el Consejo de Hidrógeno. Entonces, para concluir, quisiera entonces resaltar 4 puntos. Estamos convencidos que la movilidad de hidrógeno complementa la movilidad eléctrica con solo baterías para reducir las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero en transporte. Entonces, no todo va a ser puramente eléctrico. Este también fue el mensaje del primer expositor. Un marco político claro o condiciones de un marco político claro, y es muy importante para volverse económicamente viables en el corto plazo. Las estaciones van a trabajar si es que los autos llegan para ser reabastecidos, si no es muy costoso. Y Suiza ha demostrado esto con una iniciativa privada donde reunieron a muchas personas para poder trabajar en esto desde el inicio. La disponibilidad de hidrógeno verde, el tema del día de hoy, es muy importante, así como el etiquetado exacto. Tenemos que saber lo que es verde, lo que es azul y lo que podría representar otro tipo de hidrógeno. El día de hoy, el hidrógeno se produce principalmente a nivel local porque se utiliza también en grandes industrias. Entonces, el etiquetado se va a volver un tema más importante cuando empecemos a comercializar hidrógeno de un país a otro país para saber exactamente cuál es la huella de carbono exacta de este carbono. El incremento en energías renovables debe ser acelerado de manera significativa, porque va a permitir liberar las capacidades para producción de hidrógeno. Si es que tenemos suficiente PV, entonces podemos utilizar la energía eólica o fotovoltaica restante para producir hidrógeno, y no tenemos que iniciar discusiones sobre la eficiencia, que no deberíamos usar hidrógeno porque no es la tecnología más eficiente. Y yo creo que en este contexto, el hidrógeno verde en particular va a tener un gran futuro. Muchísimas gracias por su atención y por escuchar mi presentación, y estoy aquí en caso tuviesen alguna pregunta. Sí, muchísimas gracias, Stefan Oberhauser, por esta excelente presentación. I am going to understood on the situation in Switzerland and worldwide, which is the huge potential that hydrogen has, but it is very much linked to green production of hydrogen through solar plants, etc. And I'm sure that Chile will have an additional advantage because of the existence of those solar plants. So thank you very much to the Federal Office of Energy in Switzerland for being part of this webinar. As a Swiss cooperation agency, it's always important to collaborate between ourselves. And I said at the beginning, Switzerland does have this idea of accelerating the power grid and to become carbon neutral by the year 2050. So any efforts from the different ministries in Switzerland evidently are critical. I have one question, and I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to ask it about a topic that I don't know how hydrogen behaves in this situation. I understand that when it is used, the only thing that comes out is water. We know that water or gas, in the form of gas, also has a greenhouse effect. So are there any ideas of how the hydrogen could have a negative impact, could negatively affect the balance of water in the atmosphere if this were to be used in a larger scale? I don't know if there's simultaneous interpretation. That was my question. So the negative impact, the potential negative impact, because if we are going to be emitting a lot of hydrogen, if all the aircraft are turned into aircraft that only emit water into the air, which is going to be the impact of this on the atmosphere, especially in terms of the greenhouse effect? Thank you very much. I hope that you got my question. Thank you, Martin, for your question. I am going to give the floor to Paulina. Perhaps, Paulina, do you wish to include any additional questions related to Martin's question, so I can then give the floor to Dr. Oberholzer? Paulina, you're acknowledged. Thank you very much, Freddie. I think that first we can answer Martin's question, and then we will address other questions from the Q&A session. So, Stefan, can you please help us out by answering Martin's question? Is that okay?
Yes.
Sí. Yo creo que podría ser un punto si uno habla sobre agua o emisiones de vapor en el aire. Tiene toda la razón. Yo creo que las personas son conscientes de esto. Existen compañías como Airbus que están trabajando en esto, al menos para distancias cortas, ideas para aviones que operan con hidrógeno. Quizás son más celdas de combustible en largas distancias. Yo me imagino que uno necesita los combustibles sintéticos que mencioné, querosene sintético. En este respecto, no cambiaría mucho, pero sí, tiene razón. Para todo lo que está en las vías o carreteras, esto no sería un problema. Pero si hubiese emisiones significativas en el aire a 10 kilómetros, entonces uno tendría que revisar esto con mucho mayor cuidado. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Stefan. Espero que ahí se haya respondido la pregunta, Martín. Muchas gracias por la pregunta.
Martin, thank you very much for your question. Here I have another question from the Q&A box, which is in the bottom part of the Zoom. Which, well, first of all, they want to thank Stefan for his excellent presentation. This is a question from Marco Balam. You have mentioned that there are several small and medium companies in Switzerland. You mentioned that there are many small and medium company players in the energy industry in Switzerland. How do they survive? I mean, many technologies are not yet that mature Are they heavily being subsidized by the Swiss government? So how is it that these companies sustain themselves by conducting these technological developments? Are they being subsidized, perhaps?
No, they are not directly subsidized, and perhaps many is also a question.
Esta es una pregunta de interpretación también. Bueno, hay muchas startups que aparecen y luego desaparecen. Pero existen compañías, por ejemplo, una compañía que produce ahora compresores muy eficientes que son necesarios para las celdas o pilas de combustible, pero también pueden ser utilizados para otras aplicaciones. Y son tan buenas o eficientes que van a ser adquiridas o ser utilizadas por OEMs más grandes, fabricantes de autos, que necesitan este tipo de equipos. Y creo yo que la industria de celdas de combustible de hidrógeno es bastante joven, no está muy madura aún. Por lo tanto, hay mucho espacio para que se siga desarrollando, incluso si se expande o se escala. Casi todos los autos, los OEMs producían sus propias celdas de combustible o pilas de combustible. Y esto quizás va a ser mucho más abierto y va a haber mayor espacio para los proveedores. Pero Suiza no subsidia directamente a las compañías y no hay ninguna política de la industria que uno no quiere desarrollar una cierta industria de este tipo, así que es un momento difícil para los startups en el campo de la energía algunas veces. Espero que esto haya respondido a su pregunta.
Muchas gracias, Estefan. Sí, yo creo que sí, responde muy bien. Aquí me comenta Freddy que Santiago Morales está traduciendo las preguntas.
Is translating the questions into English. So, Stefan, you can answer directly the question on the Q&A box, especially those questions that we won't be able to answer in this live event. Because of time, I am going to give the floor back to Freddie because we don't have any more time. Thank you very much, Stefan, for your presentation and for answering the question. And we will continue with the seminar and our next panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stefan, once again, for your outstanding presentation, and to Paulina for helping us to moderate the Q&A session. Let us continue with the event. And now we have a presentation from Latin America, once again from Chile. We are going to hear about the National Green Hydrogen Development Plan in Chile by Benjamin Maluenda. Benjamin is head of the new energy unit at the Chilean Ministry of Energy. Together with a team of 4 professionals, he leads the ministry's work on green hydrogen and carbon neutral fuels. Benjamin is a mechanical civil engineer and holds a master's degree in engineering sciences from the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile. Benjamin, you are more than welcome. You have the floor. Thank you. Thank you very much, Freddy. I am now going to share my presentation so you can see it. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I will try to speak slowly and clearly so the interpreters can follow me. And I am sharing a presentation with you which summarizes the National Green Hydrogen Strategy of Chile. My goal is not only to tell you more about the strategy, because you can easily download it from the ministry's website and read it at your own leisure, but I would like to focus on the key opportunities and challenges that we have identified for Chile in this recent global hydrogen industry. Many of these conclusions can be replicated for the rest of Latin America. And I would like to finish my presentation by sharing with you some of the main lines of action that we have for the next 2 years at the Ministry of Energy, so we can elaborate on what needs to be done. So this strategy is not just a long-term objective, but it should become a reality. I am going to take 20 minutes so I can have some time for questions. We always begin my presentation with this slide because it reminds us which is the challenge that we need to address. And this is to do an overhaul, a deep change on the energy systems that we currently have. Otherwise, it would be impossible to mitigate climate change. And we are now looking at the consequences, and making this deep change in the energy sector means that we should not only consider the electrical sector, which has been in the focus of attention for many years with wind, solar, renewable energies, but also what happens with the other 60, 70, or 80% of the power or energy, which is not electrical energy, and that is consumed in the form of fuels in different sectors. And this is where hydrogen becomes an interesting resource or alternative. Our work in the ministry is based on the characteristics of our country. I insist that many of what I'm going to say for Chile can also be applied to many countries of the region which have a similar geography, and they share similar geographic characteristics. We have a very good potential for renewable energy, solar, photovoltaic, wind, geothermal, sea energy. There's a lot of energy wealth and richness in this country. And what is interesting about this, and this actually generated the interest of the Ministry on Industry, is that the potential of renewable energy significantly exceeds the capacity we have to consume it. All the potential of renewable electrical power of Chile, which is over 1,800 gigawatts, exceeds 70 times the capacity of our current system. So even if this electrical system continues growing and we electrify consumption, we never be able to take advantage of all this wealth of renewable resources. So we need to find a way to take advantage of these resources to produce something, to have a sustainable renewable economy, and hydrogen becomes an appealing option to do so. Why? Because hydrogen is a way of packaging electrons, renewable electrons, into molecules, gas molecules in the atmosphere conditions that can be compressed, it can be liquefied, it can be transformed into other products for transportation, and they can be used in a number of various applications. My predecessors have already significantly explained these applications, so I am not going to repeat them, but the important concept here is to think about hydrogen as a renewable hydrogen carrier, to put in renewable into consumptions and technologies that have historically never used renewable electrical power. So we always need to remember that hydrogen in the end is a means to decarbonize, and it is not an end by itself. So why do we have so much interest on this in Chile? And why is it that we decided to launch this strategy? Last year, we conducted a study with McKinsey and Company, and they put this problem into numbers to understand how competitive we can be in the production of this clean fuel. And they found that there's a lot of detail on this slide. I am not going to go into detail. I will leave it here so you can read it later from your computer. But the key messages is that we can be highly competitive producers of green hydrogen. They make a comparison with other countries for which we have the figures available. On the right-hand side, you can see that Chile in this group would be the most competitive one to produce green hydrogen. This does not mean that it's going to be the only one. Evidently, this is a market that is going to be settled little by little. There are contracts, there are risks involved. There is a market which is perfect. It is not a liquid market. So this competitiveness poses us a challenge as the Ministry of Energy in Chile on what kind of actions can we take so this potential is not just an opportunity, but rather it should become a position, hopefully as dominant as and prevailing as possible in the green hydrogen market. Now, this green hydrogen will not only allow us to decarbonize our internal consumption in Chile, such as mining, transport, heating, but also since we have so much potential, it allows us to export it and to tap into that potential to create green molecules that we can export to countries that need to be decarbonized and that do not have sufficient local renewable potential to do so. Industrialized economies that have very small territories and that are located in geographical areas that do not have so much wind or solar energy potential. And by calculating some high-level numbers that you can see on the bottom of the screen, you can see that the exports of hydrogen from Chile to other markets could become even more competitive than the export to markets which are closer to Chile, because the additional cost of transport that represents the largest distance, because Chile is quite far away from the main commercial hubs, is compensated for the large competitiveness that we have in terms of production. And whenever we talk about export, we're not only talking about the export of hydrogen in compressed or liquid form, but also ammonia, which is a byproduct of hydrogen, green methanol, and synthetic fuels that mix hydrogen and CO2 capture CO2, and also as a way of cleaning our traditional product export. Chile, as in the case of most Latin American countries, is a raw material exporting countries. Our greatest exports are the copper derivative products, and if we are able to reduce the carbon footprint of that copper by using hydrogen, energy efficiency, and other mechanisms, we'll be able to give more value to each of those pounds of copper in markets that are interested in cleaning up their supply chain backwards. And just by showing some figures and numbers, you can see that it has a huge opportunity. By 2050, this could represent a market for Chile of $33 billion. This is almost the same as what we currently export in terms of copper today. So this is a very appealing sector and opportunity for the country, because it means generating another new prevailing industry in Chile, but built around a resource which is renewable and it's quite clean. And this market is going to be split into two components, which are the colors that you see on the screen: a domestic component and an export component. Evidently, the export component is much larger because we can lever the demand from Asia, North America, Europe, and other countries. But at the domestic level, there are many opportunities as well. And as a matter of fact, this is where we want to start working on. I insist that there's plenty of information on this slide. My idea is for you to read it at your own leisure later on. I do want to show you that we see that there's some sort of like 3 waves of application or development of this in Chile. A first wave for domestic uses, which are in green color, where we are going to use green hydrogen in processes or applications where it's very difficult to decarbonize using direct electricity, almost impossible, for instance, in heavy-duty truck, mining trucks, by replacing imports of gray ammonia by green ammonia, by replacing gray ammonia with green hydrogen. And this will allow us to generate capacities, infrastructure, human capital, the supply chains, and the networks of suppliers which are necessary, so we can then move on to wave number 2, which is based on the start of the export of hydrogen and green ammonia. We should also remember, and it's important to highlight this in this event, that green ammonia, ammonia, he corrects himself, is a product that has a global market, liquid, stable, with a very good demand, with growth forecast, with price indexes. So it's a very attractive market to start producing a green product. Before thinking about exporting pure hydrogen, so exporting hydrogen in the form of ammonia, which is a derivative, would come before the export of pure hydrogen. Finally, we see a third wave, which is more in the long term, in 2030 onwards, where all the applications that I have mentioned are going to grow in size as everybody starts decarbonizing their grid to fulfill their commitments under the Paris Agreement and many others, but also the technology that is developed will allow us to use hydrogen in new applications. Dr. Stefan was talking about applications in aviation, for instance. There are maritime applications, new technologies for synthetic fuel production, and many others that we will see in the future, and they will become a new source of demand for green hydrogen. And we have set a few goals as part of this strategy to guide our action. By 2030, we wish to produce the cheapest green hydrogen in the planet under $1.5 per kilo. This is just the production. Evidently, we need to add cost of transport, distribution, and utilization. But in order to reach that goal, we need to start before. By 2025, we need to have 5 gigawatts of electrolysis capacity in development. Not everything is going to be developed or built, sorry, but we need to have sufficient projects under development with their earlier stages, with their pilot stages under execution, so we can be in the pathway towards having 5 gigawatts installed. And by 2030, we can become the most competitive producers. I insist that it's important to set goals in the shorter term and not just look at the longer term, because the climate action requires urgent actions. The next 2 slides, I am not going to go into detail. This is for you to read them at your own leisure, but they provide more details of the first 2 waves that I just explained. Wave number 1, which is focused on domestic applications, where transport is going to be a very big pole of demand, because Chile imports almost all its oil, and we have a lot of demand of transport in mining and transport of cargo. So we have a lot of emissions that we have to reduce in those sectors. And in stage 2 or wave number 2, regarding the initiation of exports, these are some projections of the study we conducted last year and some of the interesting destination markets for these exports. And here you can see that we will start with ammonia, and then we will move on to the market of green hydrogen and its derivatives. And all of this, which looks like a busy slide, these are just ideas, opportunities, forecast, projections. It is becoming a more live project. This is a project that has been developed in Chile. They are planning to begin its construction this year. It is called Herbert, and it is located in the region of Magallanes in the south of Chile, almost close to the Antarctica, where there's a very good wind potential. And this plant has a first pilot stage, which is 1 wind tower that is going to feed an electrolyzer of around 3 megawatts. And this electrolyzer would produce green hydrogen, which will be combined with carbon captured from the environment, CO2, to produce synthetic methanol and synthetic gasoline. And these fuels are going to be exported to Germany. And this is everything I am telling you about is public information. This project has 2 off-takers with agreements already signed, which are Koffer and Janesch, which are German companies which are interested in this green molecule from the Patagonia region. We have also identified many other investment projects that are under development, but they are still confidential. And this strategy is based on several pillars. Once again, I will send you a copy of the presentation to read it at your own pace. But we have generated a plan of action based on this, which is quite ambitious, but hopefully it will help us to finalize the opportunities I have explained before. We have broken down our action plan into 4 lines of work, which is on regulation and permits, financing and incentives, domestic demand and international partnerships, and local development. On these 4 areas, there's a lot that can be done, and there are other important areas. What I'm going to show you now is just our short-term focus for 2021. Evidently, there are many other actions that we should also take. And I will focus on one action per axis, so I cannot elaborate on this. In the Q&A session, you can ask me more about this. In terms of regulation and permits, our focus is to develop all the necessary standards and regulations as soon as possible so we can reduce the risk of developing projects. So investors, developers, researchers, providers, suppliers, everybody knows which are the rules of the game beforehand, so they can make decisions on investing, doing research, and doing business. One of the initiatives that we have ongoing is a discussion table with experts along with the Ministry of Treasury of Chile to define which economic and tax instruments we are going to use to speed up energy transition. We have several instruments nowadays in Chile that govern over the markets of fuels, fossil fuels, such as the tax on carbon, the tax on liquid fuels, such as there's another bylaw on climate change in the Congress. And this working table will hopefully define a clear roadmap on how these instruments are going to be used in the next 10 to 15 years, how the values of these instruments are going to be changing over time to accelerate this transition so the investors know how to develop their projects.
In finance and incentives, we have an important initiative, which is to deliver $50 million this year, executed by Corfo, which is the Economic Development Agency of Chile, to execute green hydrogen projects. And we hope that it will help us close the green premium that has been spoken of so much to allow for hydrogen to compete with other fuels in the short run. In associations and partnerships, we also have many initiatives, and one of them that we're tackling with this year is to move forward in the signing of cooperation agreements with markets that are going to be the importers of this fuel from Chile, markets specifically in Northern Europe and East Asia, and not only signing agreements, but as a matter of fact, moving forward and supporting the companies to articulate and to generate associations, to develop projects of energy export. And we're moving forward with that. Hopefully this year we will be able to complete some of the projects. And of course, one of the things that we're doing in terms of local development is to define and analyzing the infrastructure that we need to improve or develop in the main hydrogen valleys that will be developed in Chile, particularly in the north, in the desert, and in the south, in the Patagonia region, in order to develop that infrastructure with the support of the state and also with the articulation with private entities so that the domestic use, production, and export can be done effectively and that infrastructure is not a bottleneck. And with that, I mean ports, the capacity to desalinate water, electric transmission, and infrastructure. So that was just a summary of the strategy of some key points that we're working with this year. Hopefully, I didn't take too much time. We will share the presentation with you, but I would be delighted to answer to your questions. Thank you so much, Benjamin, for your presentation. 22 minutes. Thank you so much for being so punctual. So please, now let's go ahead with the Q&A, Paulina. Thank you very much, Benjamin and Freddie. There is a question from previous presentations, but I think that it has to do with the first wave that you mentioned, which was about the household applications, because you only talked about transportation, but are there other household applications besides transportation? Well, that is a good question, and it is a discussion that we keep having at the ministry. Why did I speak so much about transportation? Because we see it as an application that has a huge potential and a very big market for hydrogen. And hydrogen can be very competitive in this market if you compare it against oil and diesel. When you look and analyze the numbers, you can see that by 2030, if the projections for green hydrogen are met, then it could be more competitive in heavy-duty transportation than diesel, even without a carbon tax. So it would be that strong. Now, in the case of households, that is a bit different because in the case of households, we are normally competing against natural gas, liquefied petroleum gas, or electricity for heating. And in these three cases, the competence is more difficult because the prices are lower than diesel and oil. And what happens in this application is that in households, they use little energy, relatively speaking. So to justify the investment in green hydrogen, it is very difficult if the energy consumption to be replaced is very low. And finally, there are some technological challenges in terms of developing hydrogen boilers or hydrogen pipelines, so it's more difficult to do it. It's not impossible, it's just that we focused on the other one because it's cheaper. And just to mention, there is a pilot program that is advanced now. I cannot tell you the name, but it is by a company, a gas company that wants to have pilots on the use of hydrogen in household networks. And if that happens, well, that is actually happening, and it's a very direct application and a real application. Now looking at the question by Jose Donofrio, in what term, in what period of time can we see the household applications? Well, since the competitiveness is lower, I think that the term will be longer because we have to wait more time till hydrogen keeps on lowering the prices as the industry scales up. Just to give you a number, I would say 2030, maybe 10 years. Before that, it's difficult. And I insist the potential of hydrogen is mainly in what we call big sectors, large sectors, mining, transportation, chemical industries. It does not mean that it's not going to have benefits for the household, not because we don't use it in our household. That does not mean that it's not going to have benefits. No, it will generate jobs and supply chains and vendors and knowledge. So we will see the benefits of hydrogen in other ways without necessarily using it in our own houses. Perfect. And Leonardo Leito is also asking about this first wave. How can we have this supply so that the hydrogen trucks will be in the first wave? That's a good question, and it's very hard to answer. What we're doing today is we're contacting suppliers directly, the suppliers of vehicles, of cells, electrolyzers, to understand what conditions they're seeking in order to have their products in Chile. And of course, there's a lot of work to do in terms of developing local providers, and particularly, I think that the possibility is huge in local companies that could reconvert technology that we already have to use hydrogen. Nonetheless, I consider that in the long run, the most critical thing is to be able to bring those large-scale vendors that are going to bring the vehicles that we're going to be using in the future. I'm talking about Hyundai, Pineberg, Toyota, Volkswagen, all of these large-sized companies, and also eventually Chinese companies as well. And their technology is used nowadays in Chile. Okay, perfect. There is another question. What are the plans regarding the storage infrastructure for hydrogen? I understand that the technology is not yet developed, and what options are analyzed? That question is by Roxana Serpa. Perfect. Given that most of the projects are to be developed by private companies and in specific applications, I think that it will depend extensively on every project, every client, every vendor, every provider in terms of what storage mechanism they're going to use. Just to give you an example, there are cases in which using a gas pipeline to transport hydrogen will also be used to store it with pressure within the pipeline. And there are cases in which this hydrogen is going to be stored in a metal tank or as a liquid or in caves eventually. It will depend on the specific application. Now, in the case of hydrogen derivatives like ammonia or methanol, the storage is not really a problem because that derivative is being produced, or this byproduct is being produced continuously, and it is stored as a liquid normally, as a fluid, and the technology is already known, the infrastructure is already known for that. And nowadays, there's also a very interesting mechanism of storage, a current one, which is in the gas pipelines, and we already have that. Obviously, it has a lot of technical challenges and technological challenges so that these networks can be compatible with gas, but eventually it could be another option. Perfect. And a last question, just to conclude, by Sergio Robles. In your opinion, what would be the barrier of hydrogen, well, the hydrogen that we currently have in Chile? What is the main barrier and how are we addressing it in Chile? There are several barriers, and I think that there are two main barriers that I will choose. One is short and one is long. And it is very important to understand this. Hydrogen doesn't make sense if we do not need to decarbonize ourselves and comply with the Paris Agreement. Nowhere in the world. It is very hard for hydrogen to be competitive as a fuel. Well, maybe in some niches, but that's very specific. So we need to understand that if a price or a cost is not given to carbon emissions, then hydrogen will never be able to compete because of the prices, and there will always be some sort of gap, and therefore we need to work by giving incentives and developing regulation as the one that I mentioned before. And the second barrier is a technological barrier, because since this is a new fuel, hydrogen has not been used yet as energy, but as a chemical supply. Therefore, the trucks, the boilers, the furnaces, the engines are not designed to work with hydrogen. So there is a lot of technology to be developed. And the companies that sell this equipment are developing that, like mining trucks and ships and trucks, as it was said before. But it will take time. But of course, it's another barrier that we have to overcome, whether we have to develop it locally or waiting till it's developed outside and then bringing it. But that effort has to be made. Thank you so much, Benjamin. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for responding to the questions of the audience. Please, I request your support to answer to the questions on that are still pending on the chat box, and now we can move forward. Thank you so much, Benjamin, for the presentation. We're going to continue with the program. We have two great presentations next that have to do with the technical assistance process, both of those that can deliver technical assistance and the experts in the topic. And we have invited our friends and colleagues from GIZ so that they can give us a presentation through Rodrigo Vazquez. Rodrigo Vazquez is a telecommunications engineer from Santa Maria University, and he has a master's degree in renewable energies from the University of Zaragoza. He has more than 20 years of experience in the energy sector, and since 2014, he has been working at GIZ, the German Agency for International Technical Cooperation, as an advisor for the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Program. The presentation that he will deliver is precisely about the work and the platform that we have in Latin America and the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Program in Chile. Welcome, Rodrigo. You have the floor. You have 20 minutes to give the presentation, and then we have 10 minutes for the Q&A session. Go ahead, please. Perfect, Freddie. Thank you so much for the presentation. Can you hear me? Yes? Yes, perfectly. Great. I will share the presentation. Okay, perfect. First of all, I would like to thank you for having invited me. We've been working for a long time with hydrogen in Chile, precisely since 2004, working with energy. So to us, the issue of technology and technology transfer and the development of clean energy and renewable energies in Chile is something that we know extensively about, and we have seen the different transitions that have existed. Now, what I will talk about is what we have done in terms of hydrogen all of these years, because we started in 2015. So the idea is to show you this process, because maybe it will be useful for other countries in terms of how the interest increased in Chile regarding hydrogen and how it began to be put on the table and what actions we followed, not only at the technical level, but everything that is about hydrogen to develop this energy. this type of energy. Above all, I wanted to mention that we, as a renewable energy program, our funds come from the Environmental Federal Ministry in Germany, and our counterpart in Chile is the Ministry of Energy. And the objective of our projects has to do with the reduction of GHG using renewable energies and energy efficiency. We have 5 active projects right now. I won't talk in detail about them, but the project that we're working with, we already started working with previous projects on that, but currently we are working on hydrogen on the decarbonization project. And here our aim is the management of renewable energy to make it massive, and also, of course, hydrogen as the main pillar, and also the issue of reconversion of thermal coal plants with different technologies and the usage of water and energy together. Well, how did we start with this? Already in 2014, 2015, we started speaking internally about what was being done in Germany, especially in the Energy Park Mines project that was developed by Linde and by Siemens. And they integrated the wind production within a plant that generated hydrogen. So the vision that Germany has is that they have a lot of energy that cannot be sent into the grid in a moment of congestion. So in order to prevent the loss of energy, they're thinking about how they can use that energy, and they precisely thought about converting it in hydrogen so that they can store it and then use it directly in the grids or transforming it for other usages. So that is the idea that was in our minds, in the sense that if Germany, with the resources that they have, in this case, we're talking about wind, if they have a price for energy, and in Chile, with wind and with solar, we have a price that is a lot better than theirs. That is to say that the energy that is lost, they cannot use it there, but we can do the same, but with produced energy. What I mean is the production cost is the cost that they have in other countries, so that they can use the surplus energy. In that sense, the idea was to store that green electricity and to supply that energy later at any moment in time, and to make use of the fact that renewable energy can be used in this way. And it will be very flexible because we can supplement renewable energy, and this is going to be green energy whenever it's needed. Now, very quickly, Benjamin has already talked about this. Why did we say that in Chile we can do all of this? Because actually in Chile we have a huge potential regarding the capacity that Chile has to generate clean energy in the north, in the south. Well, here we do not see the Patagonia region, but in the south we have a lot of wind, and we can generate a lot of energy, many times more what we have or what we demand, and therefore all of this energy can be sent to a green hydrogen market to be used in the country and also to export it to other markets. Now, how did we start to socialize this? Well, it is true that there were a lot of previous meetings to the first conference, and we started talking about doing some sort of workshop or technical meetings, but there was so much interest in that in 2017 there was an international conference that was held, and more than 120 companies arrived and asked what was this about and why were we interested in showing this and what were the potentials. And then later there was a snowball effect. And then in 2018, we organized together with the Ministry of Energy a second conference, and we had more than 420 participants, most of them companies, people with good connections, and a lot of international people came to give presentations here in Chile, to talk in Chile for the projects that they had, the ideas, the trends that they had at the international level. So I think that that was the starting point for all of the development that we are seeing now, all of the conversations, all of the planning of all of the companies that are here in Chile. Now, these conferences were also a basis so that it was a platform so that Corfo could send, well, the conversation is on the table, so that it could launch the technological programs focused specifically on mining. We have the programs that are focused on dual combustion in the large haul trucks, for example, 150 tons, and on the other hand, underground machinery machinery to be used in underground mining, where they would use fuel cells, which are the devices that transform hydrogen and electricity. So these machines would be electrical machines, but with their own fuel. They wouldn't need to use batteries or recharging or to use a cable. So these two efforts were launched in the first international seminar. And it was a basis to create interagency. So now one part that was missing was that we didn't only have to inform at the technical level, but at the public level as well. So we wanted to make the language more understandable for people to understand what hydrogen was and how we can produce it, what are the applications, have an update made, an update of hydrogen in the sense of saying what are the opportunities that currently exist, and therefore what are the opportunities that we see for Chile. So it was really difficult to us, but we created a book with a language that was understandable for everybody so that we could make people understand that this is a current topic, not a topic of the past. And this is actually the third wave in which hydrogen is presented as a solution, but we believe that we have all of the conditions and all of the criteria to be able to develop it. In addition to that, we know that in the north, there is a great potential, and therefore a study was commissioned to determine what were the applications that could be developed in the north of the country, tapping into the wind resource and also desalination, because we're going to talk about water, combining water and obtaining different products to have a comprehensive project or projects where hydrogen is part of this way out that these projects would have. And that is very interesting for the region and for the country. Now, when we started talking specifically about the technical part and we started to look at the opportunities and the perspectives that Chile had, one of the interesting things was to say, well, we need to have a basis. And the basis for the development of the project or for the safety of the projects is precisely regulations. So we coordinated with the Ministry of Energy and we contracted out and we financed a study. And the first study was about identifying within the value chain what are the different regulations associated to every point or the chain or the stretch of the value chain. And therefore, we can have an international regulatory framework that would give us the guidelines to how to convey this to Chile. And then a second study, a national study, where based on this international regulatory map, we adapted and make it proposals to see how the regulations in Chile should be like, or at least to have an approximation of that based on the studies. And what was important was to make a match with the projects that were ongoing and how we could prioritize the regulatory advancement. On the other hand, and this was the initial question, what are the environmental impacts of hydrogen projects? And in that regard, we also made a study in order to identify what are the impacts that these projects could generate in the future. And that means, or that meant, to analyze the value chain. And what was determined was that actually, as an element to generate hydrogen, the projects have a very low impact, but the impact is in the storage of hydrogen or also the construction or of electricity generation and everything that relates to transmission. And therefore, hydrogen, we can see that the perspective is very good in environmental terms, not only in terms of its usage, but also in the building of the projects. Now, regarding the financing sources, there is the option of climatic financing. Therefore, there could be a generation of a list of green financing sources. Chile is a country that has graduated in terms of this type of cooperation, and Chile can actually apply to these funds to generate these types of projects in the region. An important topic is, well, hydrogen. We know, and the funds of hydrogen, well, of course, funds that always have their feet on the ground. We know that this is done step by step. But what is important thing in terms of what will be the results of it? In terms of employment, what will we receive as a country? Not only because of the projects, but also the export, etc. So what
electrical vehicles at the end of the day here, and that I would like to tell you more about this. So how does a fuel cell vehicle work? So, well, first of all, we use hydrogen, which is refueled in tanks. This hydrogen is typically refueled or recharged, I mean, in all the models that we currently have, 99%, they are recharged in a gas manner, but at very high pressures, at 350 bars. It could be 350 of atmospheric pressure to 700 bar. We're talking about a lot of pressure. Why? Because hydrogen has a high energy per unit of weight. If we take 1 kilogram of hydrogen versus, for instance, 1 kilogram of diesel, then the kilogram of hydrogen is going to have 3 times the energy of the diesel kilogram. Nevertheless, it is an element which is not very dense. It is the lightest element of the periodic table. So what we see is that under normal conditions of the atmosphere, 1 kilogram of hydrogen is equivalent to 11 cubic meters of volume, give or take. So we do not have the space in a vehicle to have 11 cubic meters. Therefore, we need to compress this hydrogen to take those kilograms of energy and compress them in a smaller volume. That is why we use high pressure tanks for the hydrogen powered vehicles. Afterwards, what happens with this hydrogen? Once again, it moves to the main source of energy of the vehicle, which is the fuel cell. However, and not everybody knows this, the fuel cell vehicles also have a battery or always use also use batteries. What do they use batteries? These are smaller batteries than the ones from a pure battery electrical vehicle, because the battery is not there to accumulate energy. The battery is there to help to regulate the power entering into the engine. So the fuel cells run very well in certain percentage of their peak power or the output. So what the battery does is to try to maintain the fuel cell operating and running in the percentage of power where it is more efficient, and the differences required are provided by the battery. This is just an example. The vehicle is in a slope. It requires higher pressure to move the mass of the vehicle through that slope. Therefore, what is happening is that the fuel cell, in order to operate in its more efficient point, does not give sufficient power, so the battery replaces or compensates for the power that is needed. But when we have a downslope, the power that is required is much less. The fuel cell keeps on operating in its optimum point, but the difference in electricity is being used to recharge the battery. In this case, the battery does not need to be connected to the grid as such or to a charging point. Everything works with the electrical charge. So this is the vehicle, and all this energy is in an electrical engine. Here we are showing it for a light duty vehicle, but the same logic applies to all other vehicles.
So what are the differences between hydrogen and battery-operated vehicles? Well, there are some from the technical perspective, but from the operational point of view, the battery-operated vehicles have recharging times that are very high. So we're saying that a rapid recharge at a battery-operated vehicle could be half an hour or 40 minutes, and a slow recharge 8 hours. And these recharges give us autonomies that are relatively low. They can go, well, we could say 200 or 300, but nowadays it could be 300 to 400, but there are limits in terms of the autonomy that a battery-operated vehicle can deliver. So, however, the hydrogen-operated vehicle can recharge at very high speeds. That's the equivalent of having a recharge at the petrol station. And as I said before, hydrogen is an excellent way to accumulate energy and to store it. We could have autonomies that are a lot larger than what we could have for battery-operated vehicles. For light-duty vehicles, we could be speaking of 600, 750 kilometers, things like that. Autonomies that are very large, that facilitate the operation of the vehicles. Nonetheless, in terms of the batteries, what is a reality is that the battery-operated vehicles are less costly, specifically because the technology is more developed. Therefore, there is a higher economy of scale, there more capacity to produce it. The number of vehicles is a lot larger, and therefore the costs have been widely reduced, and they are more efficient. Therefore, in a battery, I'm storing energy, electrical power. So I'm going from chemical battery, electrical battery within the battery, and then energy. But that round trip efficiency is 85-90%. In the case of hydrogen, the situation is higher costs because there has been less development so far. But as you can see, that has started to change and the number of vehicles has increased. We will speak about that later. And lower energy efficiency. We have seen that to produce hydrogen, well, we need to go from electricity to hydrogen. And this process has efficiencies. In a good case, we could say 65-70%. And then from hydrogen to electrify again, the fuel cell has efficiencies that are a little bit lower, 50%, 50, 55. And once we're talking, now that we're talking about it, we have a round trip efficiency of 40-45%. So it's a lot lower, and that is a reality. With these differences, we wonder what each one of the technologies is for. Well, the battery operated vehicles is better for light duty vehicles because they require less weight, the battery to store the energy, and it has enough autonomy that it's useful, short and medium distances. So a person that uses his car to go to work or uses it within the city, and then a particular use, which is not an intensive use, a private use. So we can go home and charge the car during the entire night, and there's no problem. But if we're talking about intensive use, things change. And on the side of hydrogen, we see that it's not going to be competitive for light duty uses for if we compare it to battery operated vehicles, but it's going to be good for heavy duty. Why? Because this segments the space, the load, the charge that is available is extremely important, and the weight of hydrogen and the volume occupied by hydrogen equipment is a lot lower than batteries in order to have an equivalent autonomy. So we have vehicles that are not losing so much payload and long distances. And once again, this is connected to the heavy duty. At the end of the day, we're talking about heavy trucks that are moving from one city to the other every day of the year. And we're also talking about interurban coaches that are moving every day in the year and commercial uses. So they are the ones that are really high intensively used, and they do not necessarily have 8 hours to charge it all the time. Every hour is gold, therefore they need to have very short charge periods. So for those uses, we can see the potential of the hydrogen vehicle. And here, just to show you precisely, at the end of 2019, the record was broken for distances in hydrogen vehicle with only one charge, and we are talking about almost 800 kilometers. So these autonomies are not only the autonomies that appear in the spreadsheet of the vehicle and that the manufacturers say, but it has actually been shown that they could be reached by being used actually. And here we can see that the batteries and hydrogen-powered vehicles do not compete. This is a question that people ask so much. What is going to be the dominant technology? Well, our vision and the vision of many in the industry is that it's not going to be something that is dominant, but it's going to be supplementary. As I said before, this graph shows it perfectly. On the x-axis, we have the distance run by day, typically by vehicle, and in Y, we have the weight of the vehicle. And in blue, we can see the areas or the conditions where the battery is more competitive, and that is in a clearer blue or lighter blue. And here we have competitive applications of pure hydrogen, and in green, these are applications that will require other types of fuels. Emissions-free fuels, and that could precisely be e-fuels, as Rodrigo said a moment ago, produced based on hydrogen and CO2 that is captured from the atmosphere. And as we can see, light vehicles are more located in the area of battery-operated vehicles, and heavy vehicles are in the hydrogen sphere, and aviation and maritime mobility in the area of other fuels, e-fuels. That gives us an idea of what is hydrogen mobility. Hopefully this helped you understand this. But, well, specifically, we are going to address the economic issues and the market-related issues that are applied here. Well, in the market, there are several models that are available of hydrogen-based vehicles. And here we can see some of the specific vehicles, and they are very interesting. We can see manufacturers like Honda, Mercedes, mainly Toyota, and Hyundai are the leaders in this sector. And they already have vehicles, commercial vehicles. Many of them can be acquired nowadays, and we could be saying that, well, in the roads, mainly in Japan, Europe, and in California, there are around 15,000 or 20,000 hydrogen-based vehicles. However, as I said before, that's not where hydrogen is more competitive, and there are many other applications where the development of hydrogen mobility is being developed. Here we're showing some long-distance buses and urban buses, for example, BRTs that have very long travels or paths during the day, and trains, and for certain applications, hydrogen-operated vehicles are very interesting. And as a matter of fact, nowadays there are some hydrogen-operated trains in Germany and France and some others that have been planned in Scotland, Spain. I recently read about it, and well, amongst others. And mining, haul tracks, without a doubt, the previous panelists have already talked about that extensively, and tracks with the specific uses, for example, in the ports or garbage tracks, and there are some of this track in operation in different cities of the world. And then the heavy duty tracks probably are going to be some of those that are going to have the highest potential in the coming years. Nowadays, there are many models or prototypes and manufacturers that are already developing this. And it is expected that for 2021, 2022, well, it's already 2021. So this year and the next year, we will start to have commercial models. Hyundai, for example, has already deployed a fleet of trucks in Switzerland, and we also see some others in China. So that's where hydrogen transportation will be focused, and well, finally for maritime or river vehicles. And this graph shows us some forecasts of the hydrogen roadmap for Europe. This is dated 2019, and what it shows is more or less when we expect to have the different applications for transportation in the market, and when will we expect them to be competitive, or we can actually say that it's a mass market acceptability. So when can they be competitive in terms of costs? So what we have is that nowadays, because they exist, there are many applications that can be delivered today, like forklifts, taxis, city buses, cars and trains. So what is expected is that the trucks or long distance trucks will start to be used soon. Well, as I said before, there are some already in the market. And then later, maritime vehicles and aircrafts. And what we can see is that the cost parity, at least in very ambitious scenarios, we will start to see that between 2025 and 2030. Well, here, this is showing it for 2025, many of them. And personally, I believe that that is way too ambitious. But well, some analyses have shown us that it's between 25 and 30 where we can start seeing the cost parity with the diesel vehicles for several of these applications. But what is the issue? Why? What is the issue with cost parity? What is the problem there? The problem is mainly that currently the these vehicles are very expensive if you compare it to diesel and battery operated vehicles. So, for example, this is a bus. A bus of 12 meters of diesel could be between 100 and $200,000 depending on the country and where it's bought. It depends on their characteristics. An electric bus, which is battery operated nowadays, we can see that there are many in Latin America already on the roads, and we're talking about between 250 to $400,000. But of course, it depends on where they come from, the brand, etc. But we are in that range around $300,000, whereas the fuel cell buses are a lot more expensive. The Chinese buses can be around 450 to $550,000, and then you have the European buses that are more costly, $650 to $750,000, and the American buses, which are a lot more expensive, around $900,000. So what we can see is that in the case of the lowest cost, we're speaking of 3 to 4 times the cost of acquisition of a vehicle. So that makes things complicated in terms of cost parity. Nonetheless, when we speak of this style of vehicles, we're speaking of commercial vehicles, the acquisition cost is not everything. We always need to think in terms of the total cost of ownership. What is the total cost of ownership? Well, very simple. I add up all of the costs of a vehicle throughout the lifetime of the vehicle. Clearly, this has to be standardized and it has to be the net present value, and I divide it by the number of kilometers in the lifespan, and therefore I have a cost per kilometer. So that means that a vehicle that has an initial cost that is very large, maybe after doing this analysis, you can really see that it is competitive versus a vehicle that could have a very low initial cost, but energy costs that are very high. So this is how analysis need to be made. Something that is interesting is that when we do a total cost of ownership, we see that we go from 3 to 4 times the value between a hydrogen-based vehicle and a diesel-based vehicle, and it turns into 1.3 to 1.4. So we're speaking of a cost that goes from 400% to 40%. Well, of course, it's more expensive, but it's more achievable, especially if we realize that we are preventing emissions. So it could be valid, I would say, this over cost. As the distance of the distance run by the vehicles increases, that cost will go down. Therefore, hydrogen, in economic terms, makes a lot of sense for vehicles that run many kilometers a day. The more kilometers a day, the more competitive they will be. And here in this graph from the Hydrogen Council, we can see different trajectories that are expected from the TCO, total cost of ownership, total cost of ownership for hydrogen operated buses, battery operated buses, and combustion engine buses. So by 2030 or a little bit more than that, hydrogen buses should be competitive in terms of the total competitiveness cost base if we compare it to combustion engines. So that is due to 2 factors: the reduction in the capex for vehicles approximately 60% of the acquisition costs of a vehicle, fuel cell vehicle, is based on technological components, and there's still a lot of space to reduce costs. For example, so we have the battery, the fuel cell, the tanks to store hydrogen, etc. And well, the fuel cell represents 20 to 30%. So we can see that up to 60% could be the reduction of the value of the vehicle. That is to say, the cost of the capex. And on the other hand, what we also see is as the capacities increase for the production of hydrogen technologies, well, we will expect for the cost of fuel cells to be reduced as well as the batteries. And what we can see is that these reductions will be very important, and therefore we can expect a reduction in the capex of vehicles. And that is shown, for instance, with this example of the H2 Bus Consortium, which is a consortium of companies in Europe, producers of buses, hydrogen, and storage tanks and fuel cells, etc., that are proposing that we are going to be able to have hydrogen-based buses around 450,000 euros. Sorry, $450,000. That is to say 375,000 euros, more or less, in 2025, precisely because they expect the numbers to grow extensively. On the other hand, there will be a reduction in hydrogen costs, and Rodrigo has already talked about it in the session before mine, so I won't delve into that. But we do expect to have reductions in the capex of electrolyzers, and also we expect to have improvements in the efficiency, and also to have costs of renewable energy that are lower in the future, and that will be translated in hydrogen that will be more economical, and that will be translated in lower energy costs for the bus or for the truck based on fuel cells. Hopefully, this gave you an overview of the costs, the advantages and disadvantages of the mobility in terms of fuel cells. There is a lot to say, and it was just a summary so that I could meet the time that was allotted to me. But I think that with this information, we can start thinking if this is reasonable, what can it be used for, and what it cannot be used for. Maybe in your cities it could be used or maybe not. Well, this was just to give you an idea. And then to finish, I would like to tell you about the progress in Latin America over the past years, and I will concentrate on hydrogen for mobility. And I won't delve into what is happening in Chile, because you have been able to see a couple of sessions of the gigantic advances in Chile and all of the projects that are being worked with. But they're not the only ones. There are many countries that have done a lot. For mobility, one of the most important or one of the most interesting projects is in Costa Rica. Costa Rica is one of the few countries that nowadays has hydrogen-based vehicles operating. They have one bus and four Toyota Mirai operating with green hydrogen, with with solar panels, and they are mainly used for tourism. It's a very small project, but they are the only ones that have it operated, that are operating it right now. Brazil has some as well, but that is mainly in Costa Rica. There has been an alliance of hydrogen in Costa Rica, where several private companies have gotten together to move forward with hydrogen activities, and they have gotten funds from the IDB to make technical and financial studies of hydrogen mobility, and also they will be looking for funds from the Toyota Mobility Foundations to scale up the project that they already have. So going from one bus and four Toyotas to a bigger fleet with a larger production capacity, and they are working on that now. In addition to that, we're looking at the possibility of bringing 10 more hydrogen-based, these are the 10 trucks based on hydrogen that they want to bring. Costa Rica is very interesting because it's a small country, but it has a high potential for hydrogen and hydrogen operated mobility. Another important and interesting example is Uruguay, and 2 or 3 years ago they started working in what they called the Verme project, led by the National Oil Company of Uruguay, ANCA. They wanted to make a pilot company to have around 10 heavy vehicles based on hydrogen that they were going to be going through a tender process this year. Well, now it has another name. Now it's called Hydrogen Project for Uruguay, and the tender process will start soon by the Ministry of Energy requesting the participants to fund this project, and the government will give them a lot of facilities to reduce taxes or very low rates of energy, etc., to facilitate the development, the economic development, and the financial closure of the project. In Colombia, we know that there's a lot of interest in this issue, and well, the roadmap in Colombia is being revisited right now. So they have not defined who's going to be in charge of that, but it is in process. That process will start soon. We have seen the Ministry of Energy in Chile speaking to the Ministry of Energy in Chile, and they have been talking about it. So this is another progress that will take place here in Colombia. And we also know that there are many large companies interested in pilot projects for mobility. We cannot talk about them, but there is interest in this issue, and there are initial developments. In Brazil, there was a progress in hydrogen that was very interesting for many years, and it was one of the first ones to have pilots with fuel cell buses. And well, it's interesting that one of them was actually built in Brazil, one of these fuel cell buses. Nonetheless, because of the situation of the president right now, who's not really a fan of renewable energies and well, all of that, the country has lost interest. But well, over the past month, they have come back to express interest. And some months ago, it was announced that a project is being developed for the export to Europe with 5.4 gigawatts of electrolyzers plant. This is a massive investment, billions of dollars. So the market is moving again there. In Paraguay, we also know that there is an interest by Petropark, the oil company, and they are starting to think of a pilot program for mobility. And in Argentina, there have also been some advances. The first plant that is based on electrolysis is there. The company is called Ichico in the Patagonia, and there are some interested parties to develop projects there. Nonetheless, there are some difficulties because of issues related to financing, and that has made things not to go as swiftly as we would like to, and the total potential of the country is not explored. So this is something that shows you that in Latin America, a lot of progress has been made in terms of hydrogen. Without a doubt, Chile is the spearhead here, but many other countries are not lagging behind, and they are moving very swiftly to be able to keep up. So hopefully this was interesting for you. I am open to your questions. My email is here, so if you need to talk to me at some point, or maybe you have an additional question, please contact me. It was a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much. Thank you much, Luis Miguel, for the very good presentation, specifically the last slides that show what other countries are doing in Latin America. Mario Espinosa says that in the case of Peru, the Hydrogen Association will be launched on March 16, and he left a link in the chat box so that you can have access to it. Now, moving forward with the questions, Luis Miguel, there is a question here regarding the lack of knowledge and fear because of using hydrogen in vehicles, the tanks of the vehicles, because of safety issues. So maybe can you talk about it? Yes, of course. Now, regarding hydrogen, there's a lot of safety related to fear. And as a matter of fact, that this is a topic that I had included in this presentation, but I removed it because I thought I was not going to have enough time. But that is mainly because the image that people have of hydrogen is Hindenburg exploding in 1930. So you say, no, we're not going to deal with that. But the reality is that even if there are safety related issues, technology nowadays is very robust in the reduction of this risk to a maximum. There is a number of international safety standards to recharge the vehicles for the vehicles themselves, for the tanks, for the production of hydrogen, for the HRS, that is to say the recharging stations for hydrogen. And there have not been a lot of accidents. Well, I can give you an estimated number. Maybe in the world there could be around 400 HRSs in California, Europe, China, and Japan. And the number of accidents has been extremely low. Since I started to work in this issue, I heard one news of a fire a couple of years ago, and that's it. And that's precisely because of this. The technology and the standards are really robust to reduce the risk to a minimum. And then also other characteristics of hydrogen as such that is very quickly spread out. So there could be a flame, but after 1 minute, it won't be there anymore. So these types of things make it so that from the safety standpoint, it's not a problem, or it's not equivalent to to what you could have with a gasoline station, right? A gas station. And then the last question, because we do not have enough time, maybe Luis Miguel, you can answer in the chat box all of the questions that we cannot give an answer to right now. Regarding the wastewater, chemical and physical characteristics, can that water be reused? That is a question by Jared Bart. Yes, it is water that does not have important impurities, but in general, we do not consider it to be reused because there's very little. So what you do is what you use, you accumulate it in a tank, and then when you go to the parking station, then you can do what you want. Well, potentially it could be reusable, but the amount is so low that there is no economic interest in doing that. Perfect. Thank you so much, Luis Miguel, once again. Great presentation. And I wanted to remind you that today is the first day of the seminar. Tomorrow we will have more with other presenters, and Luis will participate once again in the discussion panel, and we can ask more questions. We were going to have many speakers simultaneously. And well, we ran out of time. 18 minutes have passed from the time that we were supposed to finish. So we invite you to come tomorrow. We are going to have Gonzalo Lolas tomorrow from H2O Chile, Nicolas Poker from CALAC, and there will be a discussion panel in 12:40 to 1:25 regarding the future of hydrogen for Latin America, and we will have H2 Energy, H Inicio, CALAC, and I will be moderating again. I would like to thank once again all of the participants and presenters, and I would like to thank Freddie and CALAC Plus for organizing this event, and especially I would like to thank my friends from Center of Energy in Chile. Thank you very much. We'll be waiting for you tomorrow. See you. Thank you, Stefan.